it's never too early to start thinking about the long-term questions. I think there's a really amazing opportunity for Israel to now think from a blank slate. Everything is possible. The previous strategy, if there was one, the previous strategy was totally wrong. It totally failed. So there's going to have to be something totally new. And so there's an opportunity for whoever in Israel really can come up with the best idea. There's going to be an opportunity to really shape the future of Israel. I think there's a strong understanding in Israel that the previous concepts and strategies were totally wrong. So the question is, who's going to show up? Who's going to show up and offer an alternative and something that's actually hopefully going to be better?
הפודקאסט בחסות דיוויד שילד מבית פספורט קארד, חברת ביטוח בריאות לישראלים ברילוקיישן. דיוויד שילד הופכים את חוויית הרילוקיישן שלכם להרבה יותר חלקה ופשוטה, בזכות פוליסה פשוטה בעברית, שירות לקוחות זמין בעברית ובאנגלית 24/7 וכיסוי נרחב. מסע הרילוקיישן יכול להיות עמוס באתגרים, אין ספור חוויות והתמודדויות. אני אביה טרכטינגוט, מאמנת נשים ואימהות לרילוקיישן ומערכות יחסים. אימא ל4 עולמות, נשואה לאבי וגרה בדלס טקסס שבארצות הברית. פה אשתף במסע הרילוקיישן האישי שלי, כדי לעזור לך להרגיש בבית גם ברילוקיישן. כי רילוקיישן זה בלב. היוש וברוכים וברוכות הבאות לפרק נוסף ברילוקיישן זה בלב. היום מתארח פה ג'רמי. ג'רמי הוא בעלה של חני מלול שהתארחה פה כבר בפרק מאוד מאוד מעניין בנושא קהילתיות בארצות הברית וברילוקיישן. וג'רמי הוא בעצם מומחה לפוליטיקה אמריקאית, ובאווירת הימים של אחרי 7 באוקטובר, וגל האנטישמיות ששוטף את העולם בכלל ואת ארצות הברית בפרט ואת האוניברסיטאות בארצות הברית בפרט, אני חושבת שלדבר רגע על הפוליטיקה האמריקאית ולנסות להבין אותה מעיניים של בן אדם שהוא בעצם יליד ארצות הברית והוא אמריקאי ויש לו גם הרבה ידע בנושא הזה, משהו שהוא נראה לי יכול לשפוך הרבה מאוד אור להרבה מאיתנו. הפרק הזה הולך להיות באנגלית, שפת האם של ג'רמי אנגלית, ולמרות שהוא מדבר עברית שוטפת, החלטנו שכן נעשה את הפרק באנגלית, פשוט כי זה יותר נכון ויותר נוח, בהינתן גם והנושא הוא נושא מאוד 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 אמריקאית, וכל המונחים הם מונחים אמריקאים. So, hi Jeremy, how are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. So first, I will appreciate if you can briefly introduce yourself, give us a little background about where you have all this knowledge about the American politics, then we will dive in.
Sounds good. And I also just want to say, I know that we're doing this in English, but you should know that even when I speak in English, I speak pretty slowly. So if you were hoping that I would speak quicker in English than my broken Hebrew.
No expectation as those. I'm just like, I want it to be as fluent as possible. So you can be slow. It's fine.
Sounds good. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation. It's coming at a really important time. My background in summary is that I'm someone who thinks about culture and politics a lot. I'm someone who thinks about culture and politics professionally also. I spend a lot of time analyzing U.S. politics, often from a cultural point of view. I also do a lot of work on international geopolitics and international strategic questions based on culture and politics. So I'm excited to have this conversation and answer questions you may have about U.S. culture and how that affects U.S. politics.
So one thing that I realized, and I can even say that I've learned in the past, even not 7 weeks, like I feel like this anti-Semitism wave, if I can call it like that, didn't start on October 7th. It started a little bit, just like, I don't know, an inch after. And maybe in your eyes it was exist much before. But what I realized is just as many Israelis started to say that since Israel is just like a little thing that sits in the middle of the Middle East, and Israel needs to learn how to speak Arabic. And I really feel like Israel also needs to learn how to speak the American politics. Just because Israel and the US are the best allies, and I guess there is a reason for that, and we will probably talk about it in a few minutes. But also because I feel like the Israeli politics so complicated. I know as an Israeli that even myself and like many other Israelis, we're like kind of fed up from talking about politics. So also learning and occupying ourselves with American politics, I feel like many people think like, oh my God, that's, my plate is already full, leave me alone. But I do think that it's really important to know, to learn even the psychologically aspects of the American politics, because that affects every Israeli in Israel. And, I'm not even mentioning every Jewish person in the States. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with where you started, which is this idea that Israel is a small country. This is an idea that many Israelis have. But what's interesting is that if you look at rankings of which countries are powerful, Israel actually scores pretty highly. If you look at rankings of countries by GDP, that means gross domestic product, basically the size of the economy. Israel is not the largest country in the Middle East, but it's pretty close. The two largest economies in the Middle East are Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and each of them is approximately twice the size of Israel's economy. That means that Israel's economy is larger than any of the surrounding countries' economies, aside from Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
While Israel is also like dramatically tinier than both of those states.
Yes, that's right. So, of course, geographically, Israel is small, but Israel's economy is very powerful. Israel's population is growing very quickly. Israel's population is growing faster than most countries' populations. Israel is going to be much more of a power than it already is. Israel is going to be something like a regional power, a really significant regional power in the future, even a really significant global power in the future. But the Israeli mindset is not the mindset of a powerful country. If you look at rankings of military powers globally, it's a little bit harder to define which militaries are more powerful. But I think most people around the world would probably say that Israel has one of the more sophisticated militaries in the world, one of the more powerful militaries in the world. At least that's what people thought before October 7th. But Israel has this mindset of being a small country. So first of all, I think it's really important to be aware of this kind of imbalance between the Israeli mindset of being a small country and the reality of Israel as a fairly large power and a pretty powerful country.
What is the outcome of this mindset, actually?
The outcome is that Israel is a country with a lot of power, but Israel is a country that behaves like a country that doesn't have very much power. Israel behaves like a small country.
Like need people to help her, or like how? I'm trying to understand how this behavior looks like.
Let's answer your question by looking at the history of Israel. And this will also help us understand American views towards Israel. When Israel was founded, it was basically a giant refugee camp in the Middle East. Okay? You had a bunch of poor people from Europe and poor people from North Africa and the Middle East, Jewish immigrants, sort of like a giant refugee camp. And then if you look at Israel in the 50s and the 60s and 70s, what was Israel known for? Israel was known for oranges, Jaffa oranges. A lot of the mindset of Israel, I think, comes from those years where Israel was really a very weak country. And For many years, Israel was truly dependent on American support, on American aid. And what happened was, over the course of several decades, Israel grew into an incredibly impressive country, a very powerful country. But in some way, the mindset remained the mindset of a small country that's well known for exporting oranges. It's this mindset of needing other countries' help, needing other countries' support. It's a mindset of need. It's a mindset of really caring what other countries think. Israel is probably the country in the world that pays the most attention to what other countries think of it. I'm not saying this to exaggerate. I think it's hard to find another country in the world that is as focused on international opinion as Israel is focused on international opinion.
But let me, I'm not sure if it's even a question. Israel also being affected what other countries think. So I'm not sure it's like, it's like the chicken and the egg syndrome, what came first. But Israel literally is very tiny, and yet people are busy with Israel, and especially now, but I feel like it's all the time. Especially, listen, we will get to the part about talking about the Ivy Leagues and the American universities, but listen, I don't know any other country, or maybe I'm not well educated or educated enough, that is so busy about Israel all the time. Like, I feel like the world is busy with Israel. It's like it's a thing. It's like an issue to messes with Israel all the time.
Yes, I think that it's an important point. It's probably a deeper question than we can answer. Is it that Israel behaves like a weak country because it is a target, or is Israel a target because it behaves like a weak country? There's a kind of chicken and egg problem where it's possible that Israel attracts a lot of attention, again, because it's behaving like a country from 50 years ago that's exporting oranges. I think an interesting point of contrast is Taiwan. Taiwan is fairly similar to Israel. Taiwan is a country that is actually politically much more isolated than Israel. Taiwan is I shouldn't even say a country. It's not clear whether it's a country or not. It's a debate whether it's a country or not. But Taiwan its status is under existential threat. It is a technological leader in certain areas, especially semiconductors. It's not a very large island. Its economy is a little bit larger than Israel's, I believe, but not significantly larger. It's an interesting point of comparison. Again, probably a longer conversation at some point. But I encourage your listeners to, when they really think about what is going on in the world, Israel is not unique in the sense that Israel is not the only country or region that is in some ways politically isolated. And there are actually some countries that have been very successful despite being politically isolated and despite having an existential threat around them. And Taiwan's a very interesting example. I think the early history of Singapore is another example. Singapore has been incredibly successful. It was under existential threat for many, many years. The broader point is to understand American views toward Israel. I think it's just important to understand the history of Israel as a weak country that became powerful. And Israelis often forget that they're a weak country that is actually powerful today. And I think if we understand that, then we can understand American views a little bit better. American views, of course, are hard to generalize, but I think the whole point of this podcast is, I think you're asking me to make some generalizations, and I think it's helpful for your listeners for us to make some generalizations here.
Yes, as we cannot go down deep, further down.
Yes, exactly. Let's talk about numbers. One really interesting observation about the past month that almost nobody's been talking about is that Israel's casualties have been, of course, tremendous and horrific and tragic. Israel's casualties have been much higher than anything else in the past recent history. What's interesting is that reactions to Israel in the United States have been pretty similar to what they've been in the past. In other words, let's say October 7th happened, and instead of 1,400 Israelis being killed, let's say 14 were killed. And let's say instead of 240 or 50 captured, let's say there were 2 or 3 kidnapped. The reactions would have been pretty similar. Those who support Israel would have supported Israel, and those who criticized Israel and blamed Israel would have blamed Israel. The point is, if you add zeros, it doesn't really change people's reaction.
And that's in general.
I think the history of the past 2 months shows that if you add basically 2 zeros to the end of all the numbers, people's attitudes don't really change.
Right.
And I think what's concerning is that if God forbid, there is something worse that happens and there's still another zero that's added, and instead of 1,400 Israelis killed, it's 14,000, or God forbid, 140,000, the reactions will be the same.
Wow.
The reactions will be the same. Those who support Israel will support Israel. Those who blame Israel will blame Israel.
Okay.
The numbers don't really change the attitudes.
That's very interesting.
I think that this is something that can be a little bit provocative in the Israeli context, because over the past 10 years, I've had many conversations in Israel with people about Israel's policy towards its neighbors. Why doesn't Israel do this? Why doesn't Israel do that? You know, if the United States had an enemy right next door, the United States would destroy it. And the response often is, well, we can't do that.
It's exactly the response.
Exactly.
Yeah, but Israel cannot do that. Israel is not United States.
Exactly. It's the mindset of a small country that produces oranges. It's not the mindset of a major power.
I feel like people in Israel, as an Israeli, I can tell you that they think that size does matter. Like, I feel like they think, like, because Israel is so crazy, tiny, this is like, I feel like that has a big impact of this attitude, I will say.
Well, I think a lot of it is psychological. And so the reason why I'm saying this is that I think certain people in Israel would say, well, certain policies are impossible. Certain responses are impossible because we're going to lose support. We're going to lose American support. First of all, again, there's this mindset of needing other countries' support. There's this mindset of needing other countries' approval for certain things. But even if we accept that mindset, what's interesting is the past 2 months have shown that if the numbers change, the reactions don't really change. You know, if Hamas had killed, God forbid, twice as many Israelis, or if they'd killed half as many Israelis, if the IDF had dropped twice as many bombs on Gaza or half as many bombs on Gaza, the reactions would have been exactly the same. So I know that we're a little bit we're digressing, or we're not really getting to your main question, but I think it's really important for your listeners to understand that these cultures are not quantitative. They're not about the numbers. They're not about the numbers killed or captured or anything. They're about people's basic cultural attitudes, and the numbers don't change that.
And what is that?
So let's get into that.
Yes.
Let's get into that. Where would you like to start? This is a big question.
So first, I feel like even like the basic things about like two sides to the map. You know, in Israel, there is like Yamin and Small. How it goes in America, like Republican, like let's talk about it a little bit. Just like, you know, the
Yes.
basic stuff that I know that many Israelis don't know.
Yeah, great. That's a very good starting point. So just the way Israel has left and right, the United States has left and right, with Democrats on the left and Republicans on the right. Just the way Israel has different flavors of left and different flavors of right, the United States has different flavors also.
Biden is?
I think the way to understand the left in the United States today, it's mostly about age. The most important thing to know about Biden is that Biden is an older man. Democrats of his generation and his age tend to have a lot of respect for Israel. They tend to have a lot of respect for Israel as a country that grew, a country that overcame a lot of challenges, and there's a very strong emotional relationship in many cases. These are people who grew up with the stories of Israel's survival in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I think for many of them, they wouldn't say this, but subconsciously, their view of Israel is really the country that produces oranges and that needs help. And so there is often a lot of willingness to provide that kind of help. And there's this, not just willingness, but this expectation that America's role is to be the kind of big brother protecting Israel. I think that this applies to older Americans on both parties, in both parties to some degree. I think once you get to younger people who grew up with hearing about Startup Nation, about Israel's tech sector, about Israel as a military power, I think their views on Israel are different, both on the right and on the left. And I think both on the right and on the left, there's an interest in reducing Israel's dependence on the United States. On the left, there's a lot of criticism for Israel, and there's a lot of sympathy with the Palestinian movement, including Hamas. There's a lot to say about that. On the right, there's an emerging view, especially among younger people on the right, that Israel's really strong enough to take care of itself. And why does the United States need to be sending money over? From an American point of view, why does the United States need to be sending money over to support a country that is actually quite powerful and quite capable? This is not really from an anti-Israel perspective, but from a perspective of wanting Israel to just do what it needs to do.
So, like in terms of like even stop murdering Israel, don't be like a helicopter parent to Israel. This kind of?
Yeah, I think if you were to speak to a younger Republican, they would probably say, yes, the United States doesn't need to be a helicopter parent. Israel's a big boy. It can take care of itself, and let them do what they need to do.
Honestly, do you think that Israel can can manage by herself?
I'm not sure. I think warfare is primarily psychological. And I have no doubt that Israel has a lot of technical capabilities. I think the question is psychologically, is Israel able or willing to behave like a powerful country that other people are going to want to stay away from? It's a lot of it's the mindset. It's hard to do that. But let's talk more about. I'm not an expert in Israel, so my opinions don't really matter very much. But let's talk about the United States. We've been talking about left and right. You've been asking me about political views. Let's just talk about the typical American. It's important for your readers to understand that America is a Christian country for the most part. And in particular, the dominant culture of the United States is a Protestant culture. And you live in Texas, and so you probably experience this every day. But it's probably very foreign for most Israelis.
I have to say, it's a very Christian place. And I was in just like the following weeks after October 7th, I happened to, it was an pro-Israeli rally, but only after we came like an Israeli family, so clueless. Like we came and then we realized it's like some churches came together, bonded with some, I think reforms, but like pro-Israel's leaders in the Dallas community. The speeches that people were giving there were like really religiously, it was very religious, Christian-wise. Like, and then that coin, like I had a drop. Like I realized that, oh my God, this is such a Christian place.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very important to understand that. You and I are both outsiders to this culture, so we're never going to be able to understand it deeply. But it's very important for your listeners to understand that there are large parts of American society that are very religious, that are very Christian, and that are tremendously supportive of Israel. And supportive not just in the sense of this kind of mothering relationship where the United States should be providing everything for Israel and protecting Israel, but also supportive of Israel in the sense of wanting Israel to truly succeed and be powerful and do what needs to be done. I think in many ways it's actually possible that the American electorate might be further to the right than the Israeli electorate. If you were to have Americans vote in Israel, theoretically, if there was some kind of interesting experiment we could run, what would the government look like? There are some right-wing parties that would get a lot of seats. Parties like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, it wouldn't be a question of 4 seats, 5 seats. It would be significantly more than that. And this is something that I hear very often, and you probably hear this very often in Texas also, which is, why doesn't Israel just solve the problem? Why can't they just get the job done?
Yeah, get down with them. Get down with it. This is the sentence. Get down with them. They need to be done. This is
exactly.
like with this, like I'm doing with my hand. It's like, yeah.
And Americans really like solutions, and so they think, well, why can't Israel just find a solution, not meaning some kind of diplomatic solution, meaning a military solution, and protect itself? So I think that's a very common viewpoint in the United States. That's the right of center. But let's talk about what's happening in academia. You asked about universities. There's a lot to say about universities. I have my own experiences going back now 10 to 15 years at Princeton. I'm happy to talk about that. My impression is that the universities are radicalizing in a leftward direction very quickly. What was going on 15 years ago is very different from what's happening today. I don't think that this is because of university professors. I think that this is mainly just a reflection of American society. I think that the students coming into universities already have these views for the most part. I don't think that what's generally happening is that some clueless, innocent student goes to university and then somehow they become radicalized on campus. I think for the most part, they're arriving with a certain viewpoint and they're departing with the exact same viewpoint after 4 years. In other words, I think there's a cultural phenomenon here that's not caused by the universities. The universities are just a way of observing what's happening.
So then I have a question, because I guess you're very aware of the fact that Qatar is massively funding many of the universities with money, but also with the brainwash the students. This is something that people talks about. Maybe those people, this young generation, which is, I don't know, Gen Z or whatever, comes to the university, they're in between, and then they're being brainwashed. So this is something that you disagree with this assumption.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a very big problem. I don't think that there are a lot of people who are really being brainwashed by these Qatari funded centers or any other centers. I think if you were to look at universities, I'm just using your example, if you look at universities that have centers funded by certain anti-Israel groups and universities that don't have those centers, my guess is that the students believe the exact same things. In other words, there's a cultural phenomenon among people of a certain age and people of a certain socioeconomic and cultural tribe. And it doesn't really depend on the university. And that's why the behavior that we see is pretty similar across most universities. Yes, there are some differences. There are some universities where there's more anti-Israel activity, somewhere there's a little bit less. But overall, it's pretty similar. It doesn't really depend on the specific faculty at any university. I'm not saying this to excuse the universities. I think the universities give legitimacy to this movement, and they give a certain amount of comfort and protection and reassurance.
They're not preventing it, and they're also, by not preventing it, they're actually encouraging it.
Possibly. I just don't think that they're the really root of the problem. You could say they make the problem worse, but the problem starts before the students get to university.
You know what I think? I think that the fact that university are not eliminating this phenomena is actually makes stuff even worse, because, people get to those university in order to get educated and to gain a profession, and to, after that, to go outside, and they have goals in their lives. And while the university are not saying, you know what, guys, this is not something we can do here, they're actually, I feel like what those students are learning from that, they're learning that, okay, that's cool, we can do we can be like that.
I totally understand. I think I see it a little bit differently, and here's why. First of all, it's important to be aware of the history, which is that universities specifically and elites generally have historically been the place where Americans sympathize with America's adversaries. This goes back, there are many historical examples. If you look at attitudes about Germany before World War II, there was a lot of admiration for Hitler in universities before World War II. If you look at attitudes towards the Soviet Union and the communists during the Cold War, there was a lot of admiration for communism in the Soviet Union at many universities during the Cold War. There are many examples of this. So it's not a particularly surprising phenomenon that whenever the United States finds itself against some kind of adversary, that adversary will find supporters or sympathizers in American universities. This has happened many times. So let's talk about what's happening today. Avia, you were describing universities as institutions who are trying to educate and whose goal is to educate. I don't think that that's really what the universities are trying to do. Very few universities have required courses. And when they do have required courses, those requirements are very general, very broad. I mean, I can tell you from my experience at Princeton really is a platform for students to pursue their own academic endeavors. Princeton is not a school where everybody shows up and everybody goes to the same classes and everybody has to learn certain things. Princeton makes it possible for students to take courses in so many different subjects and to pursue their intellectual curiosity and intellectual ambitions in many different ways. But it's the student's responsibility to figure out what those ambitions and interests are, and then the student needs to pursue it. So the university is not really imposing particular courses or particular ideologies on the students the way universities used to. If you went back 100, 150, 200 years, universities were mostly religious institutions, first of all. And they educated students in a very narrow and standardized way. So I understand what you're saying about whether universities are really doing their job educating these students, but I think it's just important for your listeners to understand what the American university experience really is. And so I think that also helps explain why what's happening is happening in American universities. Students are not just allowed to, but they're encouraged to pursue their own interests and to do, I don't want to say whatever they want. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but students are encouraged to really pursue their interests.
To choose.
Exactly. And that's why the universities, I believe, are probably more of a reflection than a cause of what's going on. They're kind of a mirror, not an engine.
So, this is something that now I'm realizing that this is so American culture that I would say, as an adult, that if I see that, there is like a phenomenon that universities, that eventually the alumni of those, and like, I don't know, any university in the States, I would not say to the left, they're going into a very negative way of thinking and way of behaving, because I know that those students who are protesting against Israel and being very violent, and in general not, they're covering their faces, they're like being also very, I will say, rude to other people in campus. So I know they're not everyone. I know they're like, they're just like making tons of wind, so people, it looks like they're the majority. But what I would think as an adult, that if the university sees that we let people to have their own choices, and eventually this is the outcome, maybe, just maybe, universities has some responsibility here, and maybe they should think of a plan of how to make stuff a little bit more balanced. Maybe this is also a very American thing, that you cannot overstep stuff. You cannot like interfere into, I don't know, process. Or I will give you an example, like a very day-to-day example. Let's say I have a couple with a friend to a basketball class. I texting my friend and I'm asking her, would you be able to pick up my kid? I will be dropping him. And then she will answer me, I'm so sorry, this lady, another friend, just texted me she can pick up. She will never tell me, you know what? I will text her. I will ask her if she can pick up your son as well. She will not interfere into the situation. Me as an Israeli, my thought immediately is like, what's her story? What's her problem? Why can't she just like text her friend and tell her, hey, would you be able to pick up this kid as well? So, and this is very American thing. Can you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I definitely think that there is an American cultural preference to just remove yourself and let people do their thing. Yes, I definitely understand what you're saying. I don't think that it's reasonable to expect universities to do this for several reasons. First of all, and most importantly, the staff at universities tends to be more left wing, frankly, and more hostile to Israel than sympathetic to Israel. So the leadership of the universities is not going to be that sympathetic. Now, generationally, they're different. They're, the attitudes of someone in their 50s or 60s, even on the left, tends to be different than someone in their 20s or 30s. But still, I don't think that it's reasonable to expect them to act against their culture, against their tribe, against their ideology. Now, some people say, well, can't we basically force them to? Can't people threaten them with legal action? And can they be forced to? That's possible. I don't think we've really seen that yet. So it might happen. It hasn't happened yet. And until it happens, the universities will probably just continue doing what they do. I will also add that it's very important for your audience in Israel to understand that American Jews are really not just attracted to universities. It's deeper than that. They're kind of enamored with universities. It's for the typical American Jew, the most important thing they can do is to go to a fancy university, and for their children to go to a fancy university. It's not the way Israelis think about whether they're going to go to Hebrew University or Technion or anywhere else. In Israel, it's kind of a detail. It's like, what kind of car do you drive? In the United States, it becomes your identity if you're an American Jew. And there's a whole deep reason behind that. Going back 100 years, 150 years to the history of American immigration to the United States and how it was that American Jews found their way in the United States and created their own their own path or socioeconomic framework and their culture. The universities are at the center of American Jewish culture in that way. And the reason why it's important for your audience to understand this is because it will be very difficult for most American Jews to give up on universities. It will be very difficult for most American Jews to say, you know what? These universities are not friends of Israel. These are not friends of the Jewish people. I'm going to send my child to somewhere else, somewhere less fancy, somewhere less prestigious. It's going to be very difficult for the typical American Jew to do that. And so these universities, as long as they continue to have, as long as there isn't a significant legal threat, as long as the Jews continue to come, continue to attend, continue to donate, don't create too much legal trouble, the universities will just continue doing what they're doing.
I'm so overwhelmed by what you just said. Like, it's more to the left, and I get that. And I get that also there's like freedom of speech is some kind of religion.
This is very important for your audiences to understand. So American Jews love the legal system. There are a lot of lawyers in the United States. And being a lawyer in the United States is not like being a lawyer in Israel. There are all these jokes about Jewish lawyers and stereotypes about Jewish lawyers. There are a lot of lawyers in the Jewish community. The reason why this is important to understand is that many American Jews' instinct is going to be not a moral question of what should the universities be doing from a moral point of view. Their instinct will be to think, well, what is legally okay? What is legally okay? Freedom of speech. What are our legal rights? And so I see this, I've seen this a lot in the past 6 or 7 weeks. You know, in various group chats that I'm in, on social media, hearing people talk. The question that many people have is, well, let's say there's going to be pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests nearby. 90% of the group chat is going to be talking about what type of speech is protected under freedom of speech and, you know, what are they allowed to do and not allowed to do. It's this kind of legalistic question, not a moral outrage of how is it possible that there are anti-Semites next door and everybody's okay with it. People think about it in terms of legal rights.
Wow, this, you know what? I feel like this leads me to basically the question that we started this episode with, the psychologically differences between how Israeli people thinks and what is the concept of everything. I feel like it can be economically, it can be morality, it can be legally, vice versa, the way of American people think. The fact that, you know, I feel like the assumption is, you know, okay, so there is a protest. The protest is okay because, you know, freedom of speech. What in this protest will meet the borders of legal and illegal stuff? This is the question. The Israeli person will ask, how come there is a protest? Like, this is not legit that there is a protest. Like, the Israeli will look at it as a one thing. We'll never think about, is it legal, illegal? We'll think about why the university let those people even to protest and to be violent and to do da-da-da-da-da to Jewish students in campuses. I guess that as an American, for you, it's so clear. For me, just like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's definitely a very, very important difference between American culture and Israeli culture. I think it's interesting to think about what might happen in the future. If you look at American Judaism, there are basically two categories. There are American Jews who are part of American culture, and there are American Jews who have separated themselves from American culture and created their own institution. And these are people that in Israel would be called Haredim. And there are hundreds of thousands of them in the United States. And they live in places like Brooklyn and Lakewood and Muncie and other places. And I think from their point of view, Their strategy is they create their own institutions, their own schools. They're not dependent on the American university system, and they can be successful in an independent way. I think theoretically, it's possible for more American Jews to try to create their own institutions. I'm not saying that everybody's going to become Haredi, but in their own way to create separate institutions which are insulated from the parts of the broader culture that are anti-Semitic or just less friendly to Israel. But it's hard. It's hard to create institutions. It's very hard.
And also, I feel like it's missing the goal. The goal is like even to try, even from my perspective, to make a little change. It's like just the equation doesn't make sense if the Jewish population is so drawn into Ivy League universities, especially Ivy League universities, and they're donating money and all of these. How come still everything is more to the left? Also regard to anti-Semitism in Israel, because today anti-Semitism and anti-Israel goes together.
I think that there is no consensus and no clear strategy across the American Jewish community on what the goals actually are. Are the goals to influence broader society in some way? Are the goals to create strong Jewish institutions which will be insulated from broader society? I mean, there's so many different possibilities, and there's no consensus. There's no clear, there's no, frankly, I would say there's no clear vision, except in the Haredi community. They have a very clear strategy, which is they are going to be independent and they will make sure that they can be successful in an independent way. But I think in the rest of the American Jewish worlds, there is confusion, there's lack of clarity, there's there's ambiguity what the goals really are. And so what ends up happening is that people kind of avoid talking about what the goals are. And they end up just talking about general things that everybody can agree on. Everybody can agree on support Israel. Well, what does that mean? Hard to say. Everybody can agree that we don't like anti-Semitism. So people talk about these general things that everybody agrees and that are very reasonable, but they don't address these deeper questions about what really is the role of the Jewish people in the United States. What should the strategy be for the Jewish people? And that's a very similar set of questions when you look at what Israel is confronting. For Israel also, there are questions. What should Israel's strategy be? Should Israel's strategy be to try to win more friends internationally? Or should Israel's strategy be to try to protect itself and insulate itself and become independent of what other countries do? It's not a simple answer, but I think there are very clear similarities between the strategic questions that Israel faces and the strategic questions that American Judaism faces. And I would also go so far as to say, just as major Jewish institutions in the United States have not provided a clear answer on what their strategy is, Israel also doesn't have a clear strategy on what is the vision for Israel in 50 years. I don't think any Israeli leader on the right, on the left, or anywhere in the middle, any of the flavors, I don't think any of them really has provided a very clear vision of what Israel can be in the future and how they're going to get there. Instead, it's very, very short term, very kind of tactical. Are we going to build the wall here? Or are we going to build it there? Are we going to have 1,000 permits or 10,000 permits? It's just like super, super near term, short term questions.
This is how it feels. We just need to be okay.
It's been survival mode for many, many, many years, I guess. I don't think that it's just survival mode. I'm not saying that Israel is unique. I think most countries probably don't have a very clear understanding of where they're trying to go. Most countries just kind of float along and they just like momentum kind of takes them places. But probably the most successful countries actually have a plan and actually have some kind of vision. And the vision is not 6 months from now. The vision is, a big vision.
I feel like Israel's situation, and Israel's situation as for now is like, okay, let me just finish that thing. Let me just we got into a situation here. Let me just close it up so I can move on. This is how me as an Israeli, this is how I feel. Like this is the impression that I get from, it's just like, okay, so we have a mission now to bring everyone home. We have a mission now to make sure nothing like that will happen again. We have a mission now to finish Hamas with whatever that means. And that's it. And no one knows exactly what will happen the day after, when the day after will come. It can be years of work.
It's never too early to start thinking about the long-term questions. I think there's a really amazing opportunity for Israel to now think from a blank slate. Everything is possible. The previous strategy, if there was one, the previous strategy was totally wrong. It totally failed. So there's going to have to be something totally new. And so there's an opportunity for whoever in Israel really can come up with the best idea. There's going to be an opportunity to really shape the future of Israel. I think there's a strong understanding in Israel that the previous concepts and strategies were totally wrong. So the question is, who's going to show up? Who's going to show up and offer an alternative and something that's actually hopefully going to be better?
And I think that with this question, we will wrap it up. I feel like we covered so much, and I feel like there's so much more. So as for now, thank you so much, Jeremy, for your time and for your knowledge, for sharing with us your knowledge. I really appreciate that.
Great. Well, it's been my pleasure. And I do want to make sure that I can hijack your audience's attention span for approximately 30 minutes, because I believe that it's our responsibility to not just speak about the Jewish people and about Israel, but it's also our responsibility to help our audience understand how this connects to the Torah and to our people's ancient origins. And I will keep it very short, but we are currently reading the Parshiot in Sefer Bereshit that deal with the early origins of our people.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, the Parshiot of Yוצא and Vayishlach deal with some of the early challenges of the Jewish people and the emergence of the Jewish people, of Yaakov's relationship with Esav, and then Yaakov's relationship with Lavan. The Jewish people has a history of very difficult relationships with not only our neighbors, but also our relatives,
Mm-hmm.
as in the case of what we read about in these Parshiot. So this is nothing new. We've been through many wars before. We've been through many difficult times before. And I just encourage the audience here to read through some of those passages. And I think that they'll find that the present day is actually not so different, even though we're 3,800 years later. A lot actually is very similar.
Yeah. I can also say that back then in the Noach, Parashat Noach, people were talking about stuff were lining up with everything that happened in October 7th. So yeah, definitely. And thank you for this. This is an important insight. So thank you again, Jeremy.
Thanks so much.
אני אבקש שתקחי לך רגע ותחשבי, מה את לוקחת מהפרק? תרגישי חופשי לשתף אותי בתובנות ובמחשבות, כמו גם לשתף חברות שיכולות להתרם מהפודקאסט. תודה רבה, וניפגש בפרק הבא של רילוקיישן זה בלב.
Will any remaining passengers please go immediately to gate 12, where the flight is now closing?